So you apply for a new job, and you go through the interview process. You receive an offer. You gladly accept the role, provide notice to your current employer, and you work out your last few weeks or months and start your new job. You go on your first day. You go through orientation, and you get all your accounts set up. And you log into your Jamf Pro server for the first time and start looking at it. And you go, oh my God, this Jamf Pro server is a mess. My name is Robert Hammen. My job is I'm an IT system engineer responsible for macOS and iOS platforms for a company in the aerospace industry. I've been in the Mac admin community for about 20 years. And worked with Jamf Pro for about 12 years. I think this is my third time presenting at a Jamf conference. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about the kinds of problems that you might encounter when you inherit somebody else's environment, and what to look for and what to document in order to attempt to understand the environment and be able to manage it and then be able to effectively replace it. Disclaimer, no one should feel personally targeted by this presentation. This is a compendium of experiences that I have had working as an employee, a consultant, and a contractor over the last 12 years. And in the immortal words of the late, great Freddie Mercury, bad mistakes, I've made a few. So the part of this presentation is to make sure that learn from the mistakes that I made so you can make your own mistakes. All right, your first step, don't panic. This is generally good advice in general. The other good advice I have for you is always know where your towel is. And if you haven't read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, strongly recommend it. The second step, and this is a difficult one, resist the urge to make changes right away. You generally want to give yourself 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month before you actually make any significant changes to your Jamf Pro environment that you've just inherited. Your current server may be like the game of Jenga, where making one small change would cause the whole thing to dramatically topple. You'll want to examine any documentation that may be in existence and also verify that it's still accurate. You're going to want to spend some time exploring the server and using whatever methods that you deem appropriate to document the things that you find, whether that be notepad and paper, whether that be some kind of journaling software, or text editor, or even Microsoft Word, whatever works for you. You're going to want to spend some time trying to grasp the layout of the server, the logic behind it, and how things are organized, if they are organized at all. Try to put yourself in the mindset of the previous admin, which leads to the question is, if you can't figure something out, do you have the ability to reach out to that previous admin, or where was that separation not in a great way? The one word of advice I would have about that is if you're going to do this, make a list of questions and ask them all at once. Don't keep going back to the well and asking questions of that previous admin, because you're probably going to annoy them. While you're doing this, you should also reach out to Jamf to get your Jamf Nation account associated with your new employer's assets. So you also have the ability to access things like your license key, as well as create support cases and things like that. Okay, one of the first things you should do is go through the steps of actually provisioning a device, be it a macOS or iOS device. What is the process like? Are there instructions? Are the instructions accurate? It's a good idea to reach out to your help desk staff and find out what their opinion of the provisioning process is. Are there things that work? Are there things that don't? Are there things that need to be done, outside of the process after, that could be incorporated? Is your provisioning process, are you using automated device enrollment, for example? Are there processes that can be improved? Are there dialogues that pop up? Are there things that could be automated that are a manual process? This is a good time to take really copious notes about the process, things that you liked, things that you don't, things that could be done better. Okay, that's part of the process of beginning documentation. And there's a lot of areas things that we need to document. The first thing is, what's your access like? Is there a local account in your Jamf Pro server for you to sign in as? Or is there something from LDAP or an identity provider like Okta or Ping? If you're using all local accounts, then you have to ask yourself the question why you're doing that, because that's a little bit less secure. If it was tied into some kind of directory service, you probably have some automation when employees term that can help automatically disable their access to the Jamf Pro server and things like that. You do need to have at least one local admin account that you can use to log in and do things like fix that LDAP connection in case it somehow breaks or changes. If you don't know the password for that account, you can reset it. While you're looking at user accounts, you'll also want to look to see if there are API users in the system. And you'll want to go ahead and document what those users are. Do you know what the passwords are? Is there a password manager in use in your organization? And what privileges do those API users hold? Do you have sanely defined LDAP or IDP groups for your various types of users? In this case, a lot of times I'll create things based on help desk users who have some limited change ability, InfoSec users, and then people who audit who really don't have any write ability into the Jamf Pro server. Document what these groups are, who's in them, and what privileges they have. If you're running on-premise servers, you've got a lot of things to look at. Who manages that hardware? Do you have access to it? Can you log in? Do you have any kind of monitoring available to monitor things like services running, free disk space, et cetera, like that? While we're talking about those things, if you can log into those servers, check their configuration, how much memory, how much storage, and how much free space. You don't want to be me, who in the first 6 months of his most recent job filled his drive up on either his Jamf Pro server or his database server 3 times because of various things that I didn't detect. And again, if you don't have monitoring, something like Opsgenie or Grafana, something like that, you'll want to work to set that up. If you're dealing with an on-premise server, is there a load balancer or a proxy server in front of that Jamf server? And if so, who manages that server? Does it handle SSL termination? When does that certificate expire? Is there any kind of monitoring to ensure that the proxy server is running? Nothing more frustrating than if your Jamf Pro server is running fine, but your devices cannot talk to it because the certificate expired on the proxy server. Really important question. Do you have a test server? The old saying is everybody has a test server. Some people are just fortunate to have a test server that's different than their production server. But in reality, you do need a test server. You should have one. A lot of passwords. What is the database name for your Jamf Pro server? What is the password for it? What is the password for the MySQL root password? Again, these are on-prem considerations. Are there services accounts associated with LDAP lookup? Are there service accounts associated with file shares? Are there Apple IDs that are used to create your Apple push notification service certificate to log into Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager and the volume purchase program? For those Apple IDs, if two-factor authentication is enabled, do you have access to a device that will get that second factor and let you log in? Hopefully there's at least one assigned to somebody who's still at the organization. And you can work with them to get logged in so that you can go in and edit that account and add your own mobile device. If you're using Jamf Cloud, do you have Jamf Infrastructure Manager, and how is that configured? And lastly, if you're using any kind of third-party cloud service like AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean, what are the credentials or SSH keys associated with those services used in your environment? Again, if you don't have a password manager, you really want to have one. You have to worry about expiration dates of things like when your Jamf Pro license key expires or when your renewal needs to proceed. And you'll want to start that renewal process about a month at least before it actually happens. Same thing with your APNS certificate. You want to start that renewal process at least 2 weeks ahead of time, particularly if you need to work with Apple to get the password, to get that password reset for that account. If you have a public a certificate from a public CA for your Tomcat server, you'll want to know when that expires, and you want to make sure that you renew that at least a week or two ahead of its expiration. MDM server tokens with Apple. The Jamf Pro server is actually very good at notifying you when there are, things that will need your attention. When you log into the Jamf Pro server, you'll see that little green indicator in the upper right corner at your dashboard, telling you that there are things that might need your attention. And one more thing, and if you have any kind of HTTPS or cloud distribution point servers that use a public, a certificate from a public CA, you'll also want to document the expiration of those certificates so that you can renew them ahead of time. Nothing worse than than certificates expiring and having to crash and burn. Okay, backups. Really important thing. You'll want to check your servers to make sure that backups are scheduled. You'll also want to make sure the backups are actually running and they're actually creating data. One of the reasons why I filled up my server was because backups were happening and they were there, and I had space on my server. However, the database backups were not being pruned, so they just kept adding to the database backups. And after a period of time, after a few months, the server filled up, ran out of space because I didn't have monitoring in place and because I didn't have any pruning. So, of course, I had to write a cron task to go ahead and clear those old backups. Another problem that I discovered was the backups were being copied to another volume, but it was on the same. Pro database. You don't want that exposed to the whole world. You want to put it in a publicly writable folder somewhere. You'll want to go ahead and create some manual backups. Go ahead and run a manual backup of the JSS. Just make sure that it matches about the same size as the previous automatic backup. Make copies of all the packages on your server. You don't know how many times I've had to go back to refer to a previous package to look to see if something was done with it. Download any and all scripts, download any and all extension attributes, and using Jamf Pro, create a JSS summary. This will give you a whole bunch of information about your Jamf Pro server. You can save it as a text file. You also have the option of uploading that directly to Jamf. As long as your Jamf Nation account is associated with your new employer, I would go ahead and do that. And if you can't, do it when you can. You're going to want to, at some point, to restore that backup to your test server to validate that the backup actually works. If you don't have a test server, you can talk to Jamf about spinning up a test environment in Jamf Cloud, at least temporarily. One caveat with restoring your primary server to your test server, that also restores things like your APNS cert and your MDM server tokens. Having those things come from multiple servers is going to confuse Apple. So what you ideally like to do is you'd like to have some way of blocking outbound network access from your test server temporarily after your restore. That would allow you enough time to go in and change that APNS cert and the MDM and VPP server tokens. Your backup server should have its own unique certificates and tokens. While you're in there, you can also go in and change the server URL, change the file sharing configuration, change the HTTPS distribution points. You'll probably want to rsync your package directory from one device to another, or robocopy if you're on Windows. All right, once you've got the backup process working and you've been able to test or restore, you want to take a look at your database. You can use that Jamf Pro summary to look at the database table sizes. This is the key to having decent performance on your server, because if your database grows unwieldy, that can cause performance issues, cause things like calculation of smart groups to take a long time, sluggishness, beach bald, etc. There is functionality in Jamf Pro server to control what's called log flushing. This will allow you to specify how long you want to keep some of this data. Generally, I don't keep things longer than about 3 months. You'll also can specify the time of day when that log flushing happens. I personally like to do the log flushing after the backups run, but take note of that time. If you are a multi-time zone organization, you might think that flushing those logs at 6 a.m. Pacific time is fine, but that's 9 a.m. Eastern time. And if you have people trying to provision devices or use self-service or do other things, and the Jamf Pro server is tied up, keep running, or they'll set them up to run at every check-in, and so on. Policies also can be terribly named. And rather than get into the religious argument over this, I'm going to point you to a JNUC 2017 presentation by Jamf engineer Bill Smith entitled Moving Beyond Once Per Computer Workflows. I strongly suggest that you take the time to view this session before you just come up with naming conventions for your server. Another useful session to watch, because it addresses a lot of the common pitfalls and mistakes and things that may have been done on your Jamf Pro server before you inherited it, is a session called Common Pitfalls of Jamf Administration and How to Fix Them. Again, this is a JNUC 2019 presentation, also done by someone from Jamf. Highly recommend that you watch both of these. So again, you're going to want to look at these policies, and particularly you're going to look for, pick a random handful of Macs and look at the policy history and see what policies are running. Are there policies that are running at every recurring check-in, be that the 15, 30, 60 minutes, whatever that's set to? Sometimes this is a mistake. Sometimes this is just somebody didn't think this through. Can these policies be set to run once a day, or maybe even just run once? And the other thing you can do with policies is look at the number of policies that include the maintenance update inventory. In other words, perform what's called a recon. This is a good way to inflate the size of your database, because every one of these recons is a snapshot in time, where it grabs all the application information in your system, it runs all the extension attributes, etc. If you have policies that are running multiple times a day and multiple recons are being done, you're just making your database bigger and bigger. Onto smart groups, extension attributes, and scripts. Just like with policies, are there naming conventions for these? Are they consistent? One caveat with smart groups, be really careful when you're doing nesting of smart groups. Particularly nesting smart groups is a really bad idea. It can cause some performance issues. I've also had some issues where, let's say a smart group, we had another smart group nested in it. It was dependent upon the name of a pre-stage. And the pre-stage were not named consistent. So I wanted to rename them, but I couldn't. Every time I tried to rename them, I would get an error that, oh, sorry, this is using this smart group and I can't change the name. So I had to go in and edit that smart group and basically delete the criteria, rename it, and then re-add it back, and hope that I didn't yank off important profiles off devices and things like that. So again, be really careful with these nested smart groups. Again, smart groups are something much like those recons that have to be calculated when there's a recon done. So there's overhead associated with every smart group. And the more smart groups you have, the slower your Jamf Pro server runs. So do you need all the smart groups that you have? Can some of these things be saved in advanced computer search, for example? Similarly, do you need all of the extension attributes that you have? These run every time a computer does its recon or inventory update. If you have problems with inventory updates failing to run, first thing Jamf support is going to tell you is what extension attributes do you have and can you disable them? So you want to make sure that you really need these things. There were a lot of things that people had as extension attributes, which Jamf Pro now collects directly, particularly relating to security. So again, do you need these things? I also want to bring up this really wonderful tool called Spruce that you can configure to run against your Jamf Pro server. And it will identify things like packages and scripts and smart groups and policies that don't have anything associated with them, don't have devices scoped to them, aren't used in any policies, etc. So that's a terrific tool that you can use to help document and find some of this junk in your Jamf Pro server. Speaking of your scripts, again, you've downloaded copies of them. You're going to want to make sure these scripts actually do what you think that they do. Sometimes people will just randomly grab scripts from Jamf, from Jamf Nation that maybe worked in, macOS 10.10, but don't work anymore in 10.15. And then you throw in the whole factor of macOS 11, changing the whole versioning, schema. You've got to make sure those scripts actually correctly can determine the version on macOS 11. Again, do you need these scripts? Are these scripts documented? Do you have any kind of version control? One thing not mentioned on the slide, but some people are happily using Git to JSS to actually host all of their scripts in a Git repo and then have them uploaded to the Jamf Pro server. And last thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you use a tool either like the Atom text editor or shellcheck.net, with the caveat that if you use the online site, you're going to want to sanitize any scripts before you paste them in there. These tools can let you identify errors or flaws in the scripts, formatting, missing characters, missing brackets, semicolons, tick marks, etc. Okay, configuration profiles. This is something, again, are there naming conventions associated with these? The one caveat with configuration profiles is that because the profile system preference pane doesn't allow you to horizontally scroll, it'll only show in the list view of profiles some of the letters. I had worked at organizations where they had the profile was named company name, category, and then what it actually did. So company name, Microsoft settings, Microsoft Office. The problem was you couldn't see that in the system preferences profile. I thought that both of those settings, those prefixes, were unnecessary. So I renamed those profiles to Microsoft Office settings so I could actually see what they were in the system preference profile. Again, just like policies and scripts, you want to document what these configuration profiles do. What keys are they setting and where are they scoped to? Are you scoping Microsoft Office profiles to all devices when not all devices may have Microsoft Office? Maybe you should change that scope. You should also evaluate all of those keys, preference keys, to make sure they're still valid. And the example I'll give you is all of the Microsoft configuration profiles that I inherited in my current role had a number of keys that were valid a year ago in older versions of Office, but are now deprecated. So you may need to refactor, basically rewrite these configuration profiles, particularly if your profiles are set to be monolithic, where they set multiple things, like you have one profile for Microsoft Office. That's not really optimal. It's probably better to break this off into separate ones for each app, so you don't have to push this massive profile out to multiple devices. It's also very easy doing that to accidentally set the same or different values in different profiles, and play the game of, well, which one is it actually listening to? So again, you're probably better off working with more granular specific profiles for specific settings. You may find these couple of tools, Profile Creator or iMazing Profile Editor, quite useful because they have a lot of third-party things built in and allow you to fairly easily create these more granular profiles. The one caveat is that before you upload these profiles you create with these third-party apps to your Jamf Pro server, you're probably going to want to sign them. If you're a member of the Apple Developer Program, you can get the appropriate signing cert. Otherwise, you can use your Jamf Pro's certificate authority to sign those profiles before uploading them. Okay, remember back when we were talking about provisioning a device and taking copious notes? That is to help you build what's called a provisioning runbook. So the purpose of this provisioning runbook is to describe exactly how devices are configured. You want to make sure that you have everything documented for each type of configuration. For example, I have these iOS devices, they get these apps and, these settings and these restrictions, and they're named like this. And then for the other devices, they get this different set of settings, this different set of apps, and these different set of restrictions, and so on. This is an essential step for testing future OSs. When you're testing macOS 11 and iOS 14, you definitely need to have a runbook so that you can refer to when you're test provisioning devices, because Apple does make changes in how devices provision from these various major versions of the OS. So again, you want to make sure that you are, that you have something to refer to as reference that you can double check. Also, when you're building a new server, you can make sure that your new server follows the same things that your current server does. Okay. You're going to want to document your server configs. And this, again, I'm assuming at this point we're still talking about on-premise. What OS are you running it on? What versions of software, things like MySQL and so on. Who's responsible for patching that OS and making sure that it's running? Who's responsible for upgrades, both of the OS as well as things like Jamf Pro? Who's responsible for securing or locking down that server? or anymore, at least not since macOS 10.15. macOS Catalina required you to create a privacy preferences policy control profile to prevent users from getting prompted about whether they wanted the Jamf binary to mount a file share. This also will help you avoid situations like I ran into at a role where they were using SMB distribution points on the corporate wireless. Okay, again, if you don't have a test server, it's something you definitely need to have. Also, the test server will give you the opportunity to experiment with changing some of your configurations. Things like MySQL max packet size, max connections, Tomcat memory, and thread pool. Jason Ricardo has a really nice website going over some of these changes. You can also contact Jamf support. I've had the issue where I had problems pushing out profiles of devices would cause my Jamf Pro server to crash because Tomcat would die until I adjusted Tomcat's memory allocation. All right, the 12th and final step, time to build a new server. The question you have is, can you use Jamf Cloud? Does security / InfoSec buy into it? Does management buy it? Does your particular account and your license type allow you to have Jamf Cloud without incurring significant price or costs? If you're allowed to do this, if you can, you probably should. Why? Well, because letting somebody else manage that server and that infrastructure definitely takes a load off of you. It also allows them to handle the backups and things like upgrades. The old expression is you should treat your servers like cattle, not like pets. If you can't use Jamf Cloud, you should follow better practices. Build your server internet-facing behind a proxy server, have a server in the DMZ, keep those things, keep the web console not exposed. Stand up that new server infrastructure. Make sure you test a lot of your policies and provisioning and things like that. Build things new. When it comes time to cut over, are you going to be restoring your existing database over? If you're managing a lot of iOS devices, this is probably a good thing. If you're doing macOS, you've got a couple of options. One of them is Jamf Migrator. This is a tool that lets you granularly move parts of things from one Jamf Pro server to another. Another tool is called Re-Enroller. This allows you to unmanage a device, even if it is in MDM and the MDM profile is non-removable. It will allow you to remove that Mac from an existing Jamf Pro server and migrate them to a new server. Daz Wallace in the UK has written a couple of blog posts on specifically how to do this and caveats and things to watch and things to support and troubleshoot when you're having this experience. So again, the ultimate goal is that you'll end up with a server that meets your needs, that is well documented for the future, and that you can reliably trust. And again, if you get the advantage of having able to use Jamf Cloud and you get the advantage of being able to use that, so much the better. That concludes this presentation. Thank you for listening.